How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Agave and Cactus Talk. Today we're going to be talking about cactus again. I read a article that made me think about making this podcast, which will be, titled Cactus Farming in Brazil for Conservation. Yeah, or something like that. I'll figure it out. But, this article was talking about some really interesting stuff, and thought it'd be cool to talk about it, and, like the last podcast, just give you my opinion on it and see how I can give some recommendations to help them and stuff, right? But yeah, we'll see. So, let's get right into it. This article here is called Planting Giant Cactus to Starve Off Desertification in Brazil. And it's on sci.org, or, the physics.org. I don't know why they abbreviated it, but it's the hys.org, and it came out back in June of this year, 2024. I didn't read it until like 2 months ago, though, but I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about, and it might even have some implications here for California or other places that might be dealing with similar things, right? So this article its whole thing is talking about the region. I don't want to super butcher it, but it's called Caatinga, which is 10 northeast. The ecosystem stretches across 10 northeastern states of Brazil. So it's a semi-arid climate, or they classify it as a semi-arid or semi-dry forest. And there's a lot of cool species that grow here, but they're seeing that the whole region, this ecosystem, has a lot of development and threat. And, they're saying that probably 9 out of every 10 species will be lost in the next 4 decades in this region, which is not very good, because as we'll talk about this article explaining, a lot of the species in these semi-arid regions are going to be the ones that help Brazil and other countries around the world combat desertification. You get me? So through a lot of this development in the Caatinga region, they're starting to see that, well, they estimate around 40% of it's lost already, right? So 40% land mass lost to agriculture, mining, wind farms, and because of this, the ecosystem is sort of collapsing. So the ecosystem is starting to have a lot of the issues that, the whole world is facing, of having too much rainfall at certain points, having drought and having no rainfall most of the year. They're having lower water levels now because of the aquifer pumping by big ag and mining. So here's where a lot of people get it confused. They think that surface water and groundwater are different, but as a lot of new research is coming out, you'll see that they're actually very much connected and influence each other a lot. So when you pump a lot of groundwater, it affects a lot of the surface water ecosystems and how rivers, streams, and lakes, and the hydrology works. So you change it for good. And when you have a lot of agriculture and mining pressure, then these are big water users. And in Brazil, I know that they're big soybean producers, they're big cattle producers, and a lot of the, biome being lost, 40%, they're saying it's a lot, but nobody's even giving a fuck or caring much, because they're also losing the Amazon, and they're losing a lot of that, and most of the focus on conservation in Brazil is on the Amazon. So they're kind of disappointed, a lot of the people that they interviewed in this article, that this Caatinga semi-arid dry forest region or biome isn't being or nobody's trying to conserve it much. A couple organizations they mentioned, a handful are, but nothing like the amount of people that are trying to protect the Amazon, right? And this is, very sad. I mean, most people, I mentioned this a few times in other podcasts, think that the desert is unalive and think that dry biomes are unalive, but they sequestrate so much carbon, and by having all types of these cacti and succulents and dry climate shrubs and plants, trees, it allows for better water retention, better aquifer what would you call it? Recharge. It allows for clean water. It allows for lots of things that are being lost, right, in this region, and this is really applicable to the rest of the world as well. Like, their problem in Brazil is, very reminiscent of a lot of problems that are going on in everywhere. Like here in California, we're losing desert ecosystems at an alarming rate as well. And we think the same thing. We think they're dead ecosystems that don't absorb soil and carbon and stuff. And it's like, no, an intact desert, like the Mojave Desert, is a very important biome for the planet. And when you start to destroy that and put in a bunch of alfalfa farms or vegetable farms and deplete the aquifers, we very much arrive at the same conclusion that these Brazilians are in, of losing our ecosystems and losing the potential to farm. And these big monoculture industrial farms only last a few generations because they basically destroy the ecosystem. They have to go somewhere else after a while, much like the big industrial players at the beginning of the 19th and 20th century in America. They just kept hopping cities because they would destroy rivers and all types of stuff, right? So I think Brazil is smart in highlighting this issue and trying to get more people to think about even conserving the dry regions, right? Because just like a forest, it's a very important region for the world and for Brazil. So, this article was talking about how they're essentially trying to replant a lot of native cacti and shrubs and stuff. But one of the ones that they highlighted is one of my favorite columnar cacti fruits, which is called mandacaru. I'm sure the Brazilians say it's super cool or have a better name for it. It'd probably be confused in Mexico for a pitaya. But these, every cacti, this is where people get confused a lot. Like, people think prickly pear is one plant. It's like all the opuntias in it. Like, every opuntia produces a fruit. When you look at mandacaru, it's like a family. There's a whole bunch of subspecies. When you look at Peruvian apple cacti, Cereus, has a whole bunch of them. So the point I'm making here is that there are literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, wild cultivars of cacti species that all produce fruit and can serve as fodder and all types of stuff. And the indigenous did that for thousands of years. We're the ones that fucked the system up, That's probably why we're losing the ecosystems. Because all over the world, the indigenous were, rolling along for a good while and making stuff happen, using the plants and stuff, and not destroying the ecosystem. And that's where this other thing I'll talk about comes in. It's like they're seeing not only that this region is being destroyed, but because it's so remote and, people are leaving to the big cities, to Brazil, to work. This is something happening in America, Mexico. Most people that are young do not want to work in agriculture anymore. The average age of a farmer in America, if I remember correctly, is like 55 or 65. It's super old. And I wouldn't be surprised if similar ages were, in Brazil and around the world, because one, you need a lot of capital to begin to farm, and two, usually the people that have that capital are old as fuck. So it's interesting seeing all these correlations, you know what I mean? But the point is, these resilience, so the people don't leave and there's a rural exodus, they're setting up training centers to educate people in sustainable farming and sustainable ways of doing agriculture, right? Like growing this native cactus, rainwater collection, using the cactus for fodder, all these little things, right? How the natives did it, and they're even trying to, use the natives still left there to be part of the conservation, which I thought was super dope. Because these guys are the ultimate conservers. They've been doing it forever, living in their own little bubble and killing it, because they know how to be one with nature, So if you're going to try to conserve, say, a portion of the Caatinga, biome in Brazil, leave it to the natives. They're going to do a much better job than any NGO, than any government, than any fucking actor. Why? We don't understand nature how these people do, okay? Like, they got a whole other level of understanding. And it's hilarious because we think they're the uncivilized ones. It's actually probably the fucking reverse, because what other species destroys its ecosystem? Most species on Earth fucking benefit its ecosystem. It's crazy. So, anyways, getting back to the point. A lot of these... Let me bring up this point real quick, actually. It's like, I was reading about how the Amazon rainforest is just one big food forest, right? Like, people think it's like this super wild thing. And, no, it's like a lot of trees were cut down, plants and all that, over thousands of years and prioritized for human consumption. That's why you see a lot of the cool stuff that humans want, herb-wise, fruit-wise, vegetable-wise, all these things, right? And that's not only... I'm glad that study came out, because I've had that belief about a lot of systems. Like, look at the California system. You think oak trees are up and down California for no fucking reason? They were planted by the natives. You know what I mean? Like, acorns were an extreme portion of their diet. So it's like, they obviously wanted to have these everywhere that they were. So everybody looks at all these hillsides where there's not an oak forest natively, and they're like, or natively, like, quote unquote, right? Because it might be native to us, but it might have been planted. So they look at that and they're like, oh, like, that's nature. But a lot of that was the indigenous Native Americans, It's real interesting to think about that stuff, because I mention it because even in Brazil, in this Caatinga region, well, they probably were doing the same thing, prioritizing the mandacaru and all these different cacti and fruiting plants and trees and stuff. And if we lose those species, imagine the loss of economic value to the world in Brazil. This is how I was talking about in my other podcast about environmental externalities. What is the cost of losing 9 out of 10 species in your semi-arid region, right? And now, because they're starting to have a lot of drought, and I told you the development is destroying the ecosystem in Caatinga, well, they're starting to see that the first desert of Brazil is appearing. They only had semi-arid, like this was the driest place, right? Semi-arid dry forest. But now, because so much shit has gotten destroyed, they identified the first desert region, which is super arid. Or they call it, I think, arid forest, right? So this would be comparable to like the Mojave or something. You know, maybe, yeah, you see a couple Palo Verdes, but not much else, right? So to have a downgrade of the ecosystem is terrible. This is terrible for Brazil and the world. And once again, bringing it back to California, it's like, you know, when we destroy our ecosystems here, like the Mojave Desert, for fucking solar, insane. What's the cost of losing the creosote? What's the cost of losing the rabbit brush, the Joshua trees, the echinocactus, the pharaoh cactus, all of this? Because there's lots of research I want to do on the echinocactus because I know it could be very medicinal. I'm sure there's dozens of cactus that have yet to be discovered in this region in Brazil that we're going to lose. It's sad. So let me describe to you a little bit mandacaru, which is the main cactus that they're trying to replant here in this region, which is native to the Caatinga. Mandacaru can get up to 6 meters high. So, talking in American, it's about 18 feet, maybe 19 feet. It's like 3.3, you know. So it's like maybe even 20. But then this cactus produces a bunch of fruit. Really, really good fruit. Reminds me of Peruvian apple cactus. But it's like all these columnar cactus, each are way different. It's crazy because like I got a bunch of fruiting San Pedros and other serraceous, and not one tastes the same. It's insane. And they cross-pollinate very easily, the cacti. They flower every year, unlike agaves, so you don't have to wait 7 years to hybridize. Like, this shit hybridizes by itself through the wind and the bees. It's insane. But mandacaru, it's a little red fruit. It's fucking amazing. It's like maybe what the inside would look like what a dragon fruit would, except it's a little smaller. It's got a bunch of seeds, you know. So I've been trying to find some here, but I got a couple plants, but you know, I'm trying to find seed because obviously from seed I'm going to get stuff that's acclimated to my farm, and I'm going to get, you know, the best fruit and cactus to grow, and I might even get some new cultivar shit. So it's like, that's why I like seed, you know, but fuck it, we got plants for now. So they're using it in Brazil to feed the cattle by grinding it up. They're using it in Brazil to feed humans. They're making all types of jams and, you know, smoothies, and selling the fruits in every way that you would see in Mexico as prickly pears are sold, right? Or pitayas or any other cactus fruit. You know, like the garambullos. God, I want some garambullos right now. Oh, my little baby garambullos. They gave me like 10 little baby fruits and I ate them all in like 5 minutes. So the mandacaru, fucking amazing cactus. You know, I believe that this is going to help them a lot in doing the restoration work in this region of Caatinga in Brazil, because these tall cacti, it's like a saguaro here in California. It's like a pioneer species. Once they're set up, provides a lot of shade, microclimates, starts benefiting the soil. It promotes the growth of a lot of the smaller native species that maybe, you know, won't have a chance, you know. So it's like where you see saguaro, you know, you start to see a bunch of cool stuff. It's like same with the Joshua tree, right? It's something similar to mandacaru, and it's like, you know, wherever that's why they name these regions almost after the trees, right? They say like, oh, saguaro valleys or Joshua tree grasslands, or, you know, they name the region after where the pioneer species are. It's interesting. So the mandacaru, if you plant a bunch of that, will start bringing back a lot of the other stuff, because it's now going to cover the ground. It's now going to provide habitat for a lot of these smaller species to survive. So you plant one and you might save 5. That might be a cool thing, you know. What I would start saying is, look, I didn't want to make this a cactus farming in Brazil episode, but it's like, I think there's probably as many Opunti varieties in Brazil in collector and nursery hands as there is in California and around the world. Maybe not California, because we're fucking crazy hybridizers. But, like, definitely a lot of species. So why not set up in these regions dozens of Opuntia and Cereus and, mandacaru and all these different things to do the agriculture, right? So if they're going to do agriculture, maybe they don't allow the soybean in this region because it's going to fucking strip the water and destroy the ecosystem. But they allow mandacaru plantations and, polyculture of cacti plantations. That'd be dope. Because if you do that, you'll create so much biomass and reverse a lot of this desertification. The mandacaru is going to reverse a lot of this desertification. It's really cool. Because cacti people, they're like, oh, the cacti is from the desert, But cacti, in combination with nitrogen fixating trees and, a polyculture of shrubs and stuff, it can actually reverse the desert. It can start to create you a savanna. It's a very interesting evolution of an ecosystem. Pretty much what I'm trying to do here at the farm, to be honest with you. You got to upgrade your ecosystem to go from a desert to a grassland, right? And then from a grassland to a forest. It's not always being able to be done in one generation, but we'll see how far we get. Also talking about how they use the fruits to make soaps and creams, and they're really selling real good with that. I thought that was interesting because, I make goat milk soaps for people to buy, and then I was like, I've never thought about making fucking soaps from the prickly pear. But this shit makes sense. Let me tell you why. Because I've seen a lot of Americans start to create beauty brands around the prickly pear oil and cosmetics and creams and all types of soaps and all types of that shit. So I don't know why I didn't make the correlation that that's a great idea for me to do as well. Probably got to bring in a consultant that's a chick though, because I don't understand, beauty products and stuff like that. I'm more on the other side, I want to make fucking concrete with some fucking cactus fibers, some manly shit, to be honest. But it's at the end of the day, I'll work with a woman and then we'll make some cool ass products. I have no problem fucking doing that. I'm not greedy. I love sharing money. I learned one time from a mentor, he's like, I asked him, because he had 100 mil. I'm like, bro, how you get 100 mil? He's like, well, I made $10 billion for other people. And, it really put it into perspective for me. I was 19 when I learned that. And from this guy, he was a doctor, investor, entrepreneur. And his son and me were homies. So I just, was able to have a cool talk with him one time over a cigar. And, it stuck with me a lot because it's so true, man. The only way to make money is to, partner with people and you start off getting 1% or 10% in the deal, but then as you build your capital, you're the one funding and financing the majority, and you're the one benefiting the most from a deal, right? So, you got to build people up to build yourself up. There's other ways to do it. You could be a dick, but it's I like this way. I thought that was a cool way. So, one thing they mentioned in this article that I thought was freaking crazy was that some guy traveled 200 miles to go to the training center. So this is an issue. You know what I mean? It's in Brazil, they need to set up way more training centers to show people sustainable farming practices. If not, they're going to just continue having people leave, And this is not only the case in Brazil. Look at California. It's if ag departments and schools are taken away, if people, don't get involved with gardening, if people don't have interaction with animals before the age of 18, a lot of them don't want to be farmers. But you show a little kid a cow, You show a little kid some plants and he grows them. He grows the tree. I almost would bet that kid will have something to do with environmental science, farming, ag. You know? I don't know what it is, but it's like you got to just put it in people's hands and they'll find the niche they like, you know? I hope more training centers are set up in Brazil and around the world for people to learn sustainable farming practices and be able to implement them, you know, all over the world. Because if you know how to do sustainable farming, regen, permaculture, you could go to the shittiest places around the whole world. Like I came into the Mojave. It's not the best fucking ecosystem to farm, even less to dry farm like me. You could go, there's deserts in Oregon and Washington. There's dry places all over the world, man. And then you renovate it. You make it nice, you know? And that's what they're trying to do here in Brazil. They're trying to turn a lot of these arid regions back so that they could conserve this biome. I think it's a great idea. One thing that was very surprising to me is they talked about how this area is so arid that the government has spent like they've put up to 1 million tanks in the region. Like, you know, so they spent like, I mean, I don't know how much money, but just they look like some fucking giant tanks. So say each of them was 1,000. Talking about $1 billion in fucking rainwater capture and storage. I don't know if that's like the biggest government program ever to incentivize or grant people or just give it to them of rainwater tanks and collection systems. But that's gotta be in the top, man. That is fucking insane. They hooked up so many people, which is dope. Because that's how I run this shit. Only off rainwater. And it's like, you know, if I get more storage, I get to plant more stuff. So these places in arid regions, now that they got rainwater capturing and collection systems, they're able to have water throughout the whole year for their animals. They're able to have some little water to get them through the drought. They're able to have water to, you know, filter and drink and use for their use, like showers and, you know, whatever. I thought that's amazing, you know, because that's the only way I succeed here. I could bring the city water. I could bring a well. It's a lot of money. And for what? If I put a well, I'm just going to be destroying the aquifer. If I bring the city water, it's going to be super expensive. And I'll, at the time right now, because I'm so far out, basically have to pay for everybody's water meters. Because it's like, I'm like about from the nearest water meter 2 miles. So if I pay for it, those people in the middle all get that shit for free, basically a water meter in front of their property. I don't want to do that. Whereas if someone else does that, like say my neighbor does it, it might so be that they just bring the pipes in front of my thing. Maybe that's why nobody does it, but eventually some rich person will just come and do it. It's LA County. But regardless, I'm putting in water generation machines and then just pretty much more rainwater capture and collection. So I think this will be highly successful for Brazil. You know, if they double and triple that and get more rainwater collection and storage to these Brazilian Caatinga residents, and especially the indigenous, this region will start reversing a lot of these issues of desertification. Definitely believe it. You know, everybody always gets all bummed out. Oh, we're losing the forest. We're losing the desert. We're losing X ecosystem. If you have just a little piece of it, the ecosystems are like fungi. You stave a little piece and you expand from there, and it goes wild. I don't know if you've ever seen that one documentary on this Brazilian couple that they bought like this super fucking desert area, like a bunch of land. I think it was a couple 100 acres. And then within like 10 years, this shit was a forest, bro. And then the hydrology in the area started changing. Rain started coming back to them. They started having humidity. And then the ecosystem started evolving. It's insane. Within one lifetime. You could reverse all the climate change problems all the deforestation, all the desertification. If we just fucking started learning from these indigenous folk, man, in Brazil, in California, in Mexico, they already figured it out. You know what I mean? Like, look at Brazilian Amazon, right? And this Caatinga region, right? Let me put it in perspective. So for thousands of years, you had the Amazonians and the Caatingans. They're going to hate on me for saying that. So it's like, you had these two regions, right? You had a forest and you had a desert. And then they're crafting it, the indigenous there, over thousands of years to grow the mandacaru, to grow, you know, all these different cool fruit trees in the Amazon that can't come to my head right now. And then they build this food forest that self-fertilizes, self-waters, self-builds soil, self-produces. They fucking all die and it's still going. You get me? Because they got wiped out by disease and colonizers. And that's more proof of a permaculture system than I've ever seen. That's what I tell people permaculture is for me all the time. I tell them, fuck all your definitions. For me, it's a system that will continue to go on for generations even after you die with no inputs. A permanent ecosystem. You get me? That's what it is for me. And yeah, they're gonna be able to do a lot of this cool changes in Brazil, I believe, if they just listen to the indigenous. The indigenous that are left there in that, 60% of the region that hasn't been destroyed, give them some money, give them some rainwater collection, give them ways to just expand what they're already doing. You get me? So, this mandacaru, I have talked to a few Brazilians to hopefully get some seed imported into here. It looks easier to get seed from Brazil to America than it is to get it in reverse. Brazil has like this, I've been looking up because I wanted to trade agave with my homie in Brazil. They have some insane laws actually about fucking importing plants, so I gotta watch out about that. Well, not so much. I gotta just take it to my USDA inspection office. They sign off on the FIDO, and it's like, basically when they do that, they have to get like a pre-treatment so that it basically has no pest or like anything like that. And then when it arrives in Brazil, they kill off portions of it to just test that it's like, I wasn't lying, and they actually tested it all and shit. I actually think that's a great thing when countries have really strict biocontrols, because it doesn't allow for what's happening to California citrus right now, which is like a little fucking bug comes in from Asia on a orange that somebody brought in, and then it all goes to shit. Our whole industry goes to shit. You can't ship citrus. You can't bring in citrus to California. You can't ship it out. The only citrus in California is from here. We're limiting our genetics even more. I don't understand who passed that law to combat that disease. I mean, I understand why they do it, but it's like, if you can't bring in genetics from other states, that severely limits how we're going to combat the plague, right? But they do it because they don't want us shipping plague crap to Florida or to other states and fucking them harder. So I get why they do it, but it's like they got to figure that out. Maybe like quarantine the hell out of some of the cool new cultivars of citrus like that other people have, and then they bring them into California, much like Brazil. I just explained like does their whole little program. But yeah, I think that mandacaru is definitely a species that can do really well in America as well. Very drought tolerant, and it looks to be much like a Peruvian apple cactus. Not so drought tolerant like the opuntias, not going to be in that 2 to 6 inch range of rain, but maybe around that like 6 to like 10 inch, you know what I mean? So it maybe takes like a little bit more than like the native, USA and Mexican prickly pears, but it grows pretty tall and gives lots of fruit, lots of cool flowers that, nobody has mentioned that, but the flowers are actually edible on mandacaru and taste fucking amazing, A lot of people probably don't know that most cacti flowers are edible, but it's like they give so little fruit that I guess people don't want to pick the flowers, you know what I mean? I have that problem, with which tree? Foisia, the pineapple guava tree. I'm always picking the flowers because they're so sweet and so good, and then I end up with no fruit. But, some trees I leave for fruit and some for flowers, so it's good to mix it up. I just wanted to, like I said, do this quick podcast about how I think that cactus farming will grow a little bit in Brazil because they're trying to use it for conservation and stuff, and I think it's a great idea. Cactus in every country could help reverse a lot of these arid regions, and I don't understand it. It's like I give you an example. Like prickly pear went to Australia, and instead of cultivating this giant industry and like being like the kings of prickly pear, they decided to wage a war against it, which they're not very good at because they lost the war to emus. But the point being, cactus probably could have reversed a lot of the desertification in Australia if they allowed it to and managed it correctly, and would have had an amazing agricultural industry of prickly pear. So in many places, prickly pear is seen as a weed, but I see it as a revolutionary crop that can, has a lot of potential. So I hope, they plant more mandacaru, but I also hope that Brazil stops being a fucking monoculture of Pontificus indica, like that. We've already talked about why there's so many issues with the monoculture of Pontificus indica in previous episodes, but it's like, it's a lot of disease and a lot of loss of production in Brazil as well because of this monoculture. Why doesn't Brazil start planting prickly pear with mandacaru? Go to Peru and pick up some fucking Peruvian apple cacti. Go across South America and pick up lots of these different fruiting cacti that are native. And plant plantations of dozens of these, That's what they need to do, man. They need to get away from that monoculture of Pontificus indica, or they're going to start running into the same issues that Tunisia has right now, which is losing 10 to 30% of their production to plague. Brazil isn't that bad yet, but I know farms that have been wiped out in Brazil by it, so it has the potential to get there for sure. And Brazil has one of the largest beef and cattle industries in the world. A lot of people don't know, actually, but some of the biggest meat processors in America are Brazilian owned. So not only do they own a lot of cattle and have a giant industry, they own a lot of the global beef market. You know what I mean? Argentina also is a big player, which is right next to Brazil. So Brazil has a potential. Right now they're producing so much soybean and corn and all these different crops that go into the cattle production, right? Why not start, like I mentioned, growing a diverse polyculture of cacti, and then they could start giving 60% of that to the cattle, and then they don't have to fucking, use so much of that soybean that is destroying the fucking forest and is destroying the Caatinga desert biome or dry forest biome, right? It'll take pressure off because the cactus also isn't going to put more pressure on the aquifers. This isn't going to destroy surface water, which is a huge thing in Brazil. There's rivers running through the whole freaking country. So if they get big soybean producers, it starts to destroy those surface water systems. Switch to cactus. You know what I mean? And the same thing, they got big pork and, big other animal industries, and it's like all of that can go cactus, I mean, shit, I've even fed it to a lot of birds, but the birds you can't give up to 60%. You probably give like 10-20% when you mix it in with grain. Well, there I'll say maybe more research needed because I've just been experimenting, so maybe it can take more. But shit, with my sheep or goats, I know I can get them up to 70-80%, The cattle, they're a little bit bigger animals, so that's why 50-60% is a little bit better. But yeah, I think Brazil should be planting way more cactus, and I hope to see that happen in the future, and I hope to see Brazil, it's already a top cactus researcher and producer. What it needs to be now is a top cactus genetics producer, because cacti can hybridize so easily. They need to start bringing in maybe American opuntias and different stuff that might actually, like I mentioned, just be available at their nurseries, like plant nurseries. But by bringing in all that stuff, maybe they'll start having this industry that can provide for all of their cattle and humans a very sustainable group of products, Brazil is also the second largest country in Latin America. They use an insane amount of concrete, They should be studying how I've been trying to pitch people in California to study the cactus fiber being used in concrete, I've already read lots of research of how agave can strengthen concrete. But it's like, what about cactus? It's also very strong fiber. So what if a lot of the construction, insulation, construction, concrete, non-structural, a lot of that stuff could be involving cactus, What does that mean? That means you need less mining that are destroying these ecosystems to pull out sand and gravel, that's the thing. Sometimes when you build this cactus industry, you're going to realize benefits you don't even realize, And the same thing with, there's big vineyards in Brazil, there's big fruit plantations. Like a lot of that stuff that they're using to tie things up can come from sisal agave. They grow a lot of sisal agave. So I believe too that they need to start, Brazil is one of the biggest growers of sisal agave, if not the largest in the world. Why are they not why are entrepreneurs not using the sisalana to create, fabrics and clothes companies that can promote Brazilian fashion around the world, or use Brazilian fabric around the world? Brazil needs to start innovating. Brazilian entrepreneurs need to step up there and, start trying to find ways to use cactus to create new companies, But yeah, I just wanted to bring this article up today and talk about it a little bit, my opinion on it and stuff. And I think it's a great thing that they're doing. I hope, or I wish them a lot of luck in their conservation efforts, and I hope to one day maybe visit this region where mandacaru grows native, and maybe somehow I can help these people out. But definitely, if you're from that region, hit me up and we could talk cactus. And if someone happens to listen to it in Brazil, then let's talk about, getting you on the podcast and talking about cactus farming in Brazil. But I'll catch y'all later. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Brazil is a powerhouse in cactus, and more than likely will be continuing that in the next decades. I only think they're going to become more of a powerhouse, especially now that they're trying to use cactus for biofuels. And, they're succeeding a lot in those trials. And, because they are a big soybean producer, they're already making a lot of biofuel. And they have a lot of these networks already, entrepreneurs and companies already in this space. So pretty sure the biofuel will be the next big thing popping out of cactus in Brazil. If I had to place a bet, you know what I mean? Like, people grow the prickly pear everywhere, but if I had to place a bet on which big next industry is going to come out of cactus, I would say biofuels. And if I have to say who's in the prime position to blow that up, it's probably Brazil. So, hopefully if you're in California like me, a farmer here, growing cactus, you want to, take some inspiration from the Brazilians and go read a little bit about the Brazilian cactus farming industry, and maybe you could learn some stuff or apply some stuff, you know, because everybody thinks only cactus is growing in Mexico, you know, but it's growing all over Africa, Latin America, it's naturalized all over Europe, it's around the world, man. The cactus went global already, much like agave. So, yeah, I'll catch you all on the next one. I want to do the next one talking about this really interesting agave article that I'll just leave as a surprise. But yeah, happy holidays to everyone, and catch y'all in 2025. Peace out, homies.